Well, hello and welcome to a Sky Sports Cricket Vodcast. We are reviewing what has happened at the Adelaide Oval in the second Test match of the Ashes series. It's finished in a heavy defeat for England again, this time by 275 runs. As ever, I've got Nasser, Rob and Michael Atherton, who's our man on the ground in Australia. So I'll come to you first, Michael. Another very disappointing Test match all round for England. What would you focus on as being, again, the main stumbling blocks for England?
Quite a few things. I thought England were poor in this game. Obviously, they had a very good afternoon on the final afternoon where they fought tremendously hard, showed a lot of spirit. All the batsmen, following Ollie Pope's early dismissal, all the batsmen really had to be prized out. So they could certainly be proud of the way they fought this afternoon. But that was on the back of 4 poor days, in my view. I thought England were outplayed in all facets of the game here. I thought they selected badly. I thought their strategy with the ball was poor. They obviously didn't get enough runs on a good Adelaide pitch. They were really outplayed by Australia, and obviously Australia without 2 of their main bowlers, Pat Cummins and Josh Hazlewood. And what happened this afternoon shouldn't camouflage that, albeit it was great to see that fighting spirit.
Nas, how did you see it, the overall Test match? What were the big downsides, other than obviously the big defeat, but where England went wrong?
I think they went wrong again before a ball went down, really. I mean, for the life of me, I can't work out how on a green top in Brisbane, you win the toss and bat and play a balanced attack with a spinner and leave out Broad and Anderson. And then you turn up to a flat, dry, hot one in Adelaide with no cloud cover throughout the Test match, and you play 5 seamers and leave out your spinner. So before a ball went down, again, like the first Test match, they are making poor decisions off the field. And then in all 3 facets, as Michael says there, catching again, wickets off no balls again, bowlers just a bit short on length, again, in comparison, not just what Af talks about in the Ben Stokes role and banging it halfway in, but even their stock ball was half a metre shorter than where it needs to be in Adelaide. Similar mistake they made 4 years ago, and occasionally they correct it. It's almost like they're scared of going for runs. You speak to any modern bowler and he'll tell you his economy rate and what the run rate is. So you sometimes, with our English bowlers, you have to cajole them into bowling a bit fuller, and then they'll give away runs, but there's more chance of getting wickets. That's what Stark does. The best bowler in Adelaide historically, that's exactly what he does. He goes fuller. But again, the bottom line is, with all of that, the bottom line is the batting. On a flat pitch in Adelaide, they got 230 in their first innings and 190 in the second. So the batting continues to be, with the exception of Root, continues to be a serious concern for English cricket.
Keith, before the series began, a lot of people were saying, well, how are we going to take 20 wickets in Australia? But people quite rightly made the point, as Nasser is alluding to there, batting. You got to score 400, 450 regularly. Australia have done it in this Test match. England were 236 all out. They've got to find a way of making these scores. Is it a batting lineup, in your opinion, that is capable of doing it? Or is it too reliant on Joe Root, too reliant on, say, a Ben Stokes, too reliant on Milan at the minute?
Oh, well, it's obviously far too reliant on Joe Root and has been for the last year, 2 years almost. In fact, for even longer than that, because we were probably talking like this when we said it was reliant on Cook and then Root. So it's been a long, long time since we've been able to sort of bank on players coming in and getting runs. And the biggest concern with that, I think, is that what do you do from here, though? You know, if you're a coach in that setup, it's the same thing with the spin, really. It's like, you know, they made a shocking decision, as Nasser said, to leave out your spinner on this one and play one on a green seamer. But the fact is, they don't rate their spinner at all. And then the same thing comes with the batting. What do you do? Who do you bring in? You've basically got youngsters to come in. You know, these guys like Rory Burns, people like that. They're the ones that are meant to be the sort of senior, trusted players that are there to go on and become, you know, good Test cricketers at the least. So, you know, if you're not getting that from them, then you're going to have to look at your youngsters, who really are the ones that should be learning and taking it for a bit of experience. So you're not sure. It's the most worrying thing. You know, what do they do from here?
Why aren't they scoring runs? I mean, as you pointed out earlier, there was no Hazlewood, no Cummins, so a slightly less potent Australian attack, but still get bowled out for 236. Where are they going wrong?
One thing I would say is that I thought Australia's bowling was excellent in this game. And that's not, we'll maybe turn the focus to batting in a minute, but obviously two sides that play the game. And this Australian attack is pretty relentless. And I know they were without Cummins and Hazelwood. The two lads who came in didn't let the colours down at all. Jai Richardson got 5 today, and Nasser is accurate. And I think Cameron Green is a massive plus for them. This guy can bowl at 140, get it to bounce off a length, get it to move away. And it just means that they are relentless. But the point Nasser made about Mitchell Starc is really a good one. When you contrasted the strategy that England went into this game with their bowling and the way Australia bowled, it really was chalk and cheese. Malan and Root had put on 140 or whatever they'd put on, and it was a flat deck and the sun was shining and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. You can imagine what England would have done in that situation. They'd have started to whack it into the pitch and put 4 men back on the leg side and almost wait for a mistake. Australia were completely different. They redoubled their efforts. They bowled with unbelievable discipline, set the field straight, got the batsmen coming forward and worked pressure and brought pressure to bear and brought their results. So, and England did that actually for an hour yesterday. They were brilliant, I thought, for an hour when Ben Stokes had to take over the captaincy. I'm not saying that's why they're brilliant, but just happened to coincide with that. But they took a lesson out of Australia's book and really pitched it up, made Australia work for their runs. And even though the ball was doing nothing and it was a flat pitch, England looked a proper side at that point. So I'd make the point that Australia's attack is excellent and England are just not batting well enough and haven't done for a long time. That's partly personnel. One assumes it's partly confidence now, because when you go through a period of time when you're not getting runs on the board, that confidence must start to drain away. But as I mentioned in the last vodcast that we did, batting is an individual game. And whilst Root is getting runs, nobody else is getting enough of them. And that's simply a personnel matter.
Well, let's talk about personnel then. Let's focus in on Ollie Pope, who at times has looked very frenetic against the spin, a failure in day 5 out in Adelaide. Where are you at with him? He's obviously a very talented young batsman, but where are you at with him?
Frenetic sums him up very well. Frenetic definitely against Nathan Lyon. I think England today and in this game played Nathan Lyon better. I think they've realised Nathan Lyon gets a lot of drop and it's very difficult to get down the pitch to. So they played him off the back foot. I mean, it ended up costing Ben Stokes his wicket, getting LBW, but the England batters played him well off the back foot. Ollie Pope still believes that he can get down the pitch to Nathan Lyon, keeps coming, but when he gets there, the difference between Leach and Bess and Lyon is that Lyon gets that drop. He plays on that ground. He plays in Australia with a Kookaburra ball. He has to deceive the batter before it even lands, and that's what he's doing. And Ollie Pope is all over the place with his game plan against Nathan Lyon. So that's immediately putting him under pressure. He can nick off on the 5th day to Mitchell Starc, as he did today. His brain's a little bit scrambled. He is a touch player, Ollie Pope. So when he goes through the season playing for Surrey, you will see he gets on a roll. He'll go 100, 100, double 100. For me, there are power hitters. Someone like Owen Morgan is a power hitter. He can have 3 months off, as we've seen, and come in and power hit as if he's not missed any cricket. When you are a touch player, I think you need to keep playing. So a tour like this will put Pope under pressure because A, in a game, he's not getting any runs, and B, in between games, there are no state games. It's just the nets. And you don't get into that much rhythm in the nets because there is no Starc in the nets. There is no Nathan Lyon getting drop on it. So it worries me. He needs to somehow try and occupy the crease and realise that it will get easier. Now that they've played him for 2 games, I would probably play him another game. But none of that batting lineup, with the exception of the big names that we've mentioned in Stokes and Root, I don't think any of that batting lineup can moan if someone says, sorry, we're going to go Crawley or Bairstow or Lawrence. We want to mix it up. That's what we do in the bowling every single week. We mix the bowling up, but batters, you carry on. So I don't think anyone could complain if they do mix up the batting a bit going ahead.
It's a very valid point Nasser makes, Keezy, about no state games. So someone like Ollie Pope or whoever can't go away and just try and spend some time in the middle. The other thing you've got to throw in now, and Michael might be able to tell us a little bit more about how things are in Australia, there's going to be more restrictions on the players. Now, we spoke to Ollie during that first season of games without crowds where the players were staying on site. And Ollie said to us, you're at the Ageas Bowl, when you get 2 low scores, you go back to your room and you're overlooking the same ground that you've just failed at. Now, it's not quite the same as that, but there are restrictions on the players now. They can't go out and just get away completely from the game. They're stuck indoors. I mean, that adds another layer of complexity when you're trying to find some form and get your mental side of the game in order.
Yeah, look, I'm sure that's horrendous, but the problem is no one's going to care when you walk out to bat and whether you've got runs or not. We're all going to be doing vodcasts and the pundits are all going to be talking and the journalists are going to be writing. And the only currency you'll have is whether you've scored runs. The problem for Ollie Pope is he looks, and everything about him suggests he's going to be a really good player. But the one thing you can't see with people is like their mental toughness, their capacity for scoring runs and getting through those tough times and all of that. And the one thing I see with Pope, sometimes you have players that are frenetic and they're trying to be busy. And they're doing that, Labuschagne was busy, even though he wasn't scoring any runs. He was busy. He was always looking for singles, stuff like that. Pope is doing it because he looks like he's really just has no confidence. He doesn't back his defence against Lions. So he's just sitting there going, all right, I'm going to do something. And he's done that now for almost 20 tests. He started against India. Then he found that period in South Africa where he thought, here we go, Ollie Pope's going to be the player. And everyone talks about him in such high regard. His test is to prove that he's got all the shots, the technique, stuff like that. Is he mentally up for Test cricket? That's the thing that Ollie Pope's going to have to prove. Now, whether he gets to do that in the next Test match, I don't know. He would be one of those that I would have in the firing line, to be honest, because this has been going on for a little while now, and he sort of gets a lot of opportunities, Ollie Pope, because people think he looks like, you're just waiting for that moment where he's going to be the next Joe Root or something, but he just mentally looks a long way away from that for me.
So Nash, you'd give Ollie another game, fair enough. He's got a high ceiling because A, talented batsman, B, of his age. Where are you at with Rory Burns? Is it a point where he's of an age where actually it might be best to get a Dan Lawrence, Zach Crawley? How long before we start talking about Zach Crawley with Rob Key on the call? But get him in because of his age and the ceiling that he might be capable of hitting.
Well, I mean, the other thing about Ollie Pope was that, 2 games ago, it seems like a long time ago at the Oval, he got 81 against India. So his last game before this tour. So there's a bit of currency in that. Burns, the other problem is sort of, should you just pick people because they're doing enough? You got 30 odd, that keeps you in the side. I don't think with any selection, it has to be a long-term, is Burns the future? Do we see a future in Burns? Don't just change for the sake of it. But I go back to my point, twofold here. If you change Burns, you're going to have to go Zach Crawley. Zach Crawley averages 11 this year in Test match cricket. So let's not just presume you're changing for the better in going for Zach Crawley. And also Zach, like the rest of that batting lineup, because of the rain in Brisbane, I think he got a few in one of the games there, or when he had his bat, there's no in-between games. So again, you can just go in the nets, and then suddenly you're out there at the MCG against Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark. So you do have to have a look at them, and you do have to look at them in the eyes and go, are you going to be up for that battle with Burns at the MCG? One thing I'll say about Burns, and it's the opposite of what Rob just said about Ollie Pope, I think Burns is a fairly gutsy cricketer, right? I think Burns, to have that technique and be successful and get the runs he's got, I think you have to have a bit about you, and I think he has. And I would want a bit of character and a bit of fight going into that MCG Test match. But if he gets dropped, again, as I said just now, I don't think any of that batting lineup, apart from Stokes and Root, could have a moan because they are all vulnerable.
But isn't that exactly the point? And that's a little bit where England's selection for this trip has been sort of underwhelming, I think. I know you can sort of look back and hindsight's a wonderful thing. Because when you're selecting teams, I would have thought you always look for the upside. What is their good? If the penny drops for this player, are they going to be a sensational Test cricketer? And you look at that, you say someone like Jack Leach. Now, normally you guys would have been able to blame the selectors, but the selector is Chris Silverwood. He's the one who picks all of these people. And you look at someone like Burns, and I'm just sort of sitting there thinking and go, what's his good? You know, is he going to be someone at 30, whatever he is his good? If he does find his rhythm and all these moving parts, is that going to be enough? Is he going to go on and become someone who churns out runs like Cook, like Strauss, like people who have done really well as openers for England in Test cricket? Or are we, in 2 or 3 Test matches time in the summer, going to be going, well, he's got a lot of moving parts, he's got a lot of problems with his technique, and he needs rhythm? Are we going to constantly be in this state of flux with him? And I sort of feel that we are, whereas someone like, and I know you go about a Zach Crawley or a Dan Lawrence or any of these players, they could be, they could average 10 for the year, they could average 20, or they could find something that turns them into really, really good Test match cricketers for a long time. And that's where I would go. If I'm England now, I would start looking at the upside, not thinking of somebody who might be able to get me through a game at the MCG and might guts me out a few runs. It's like, who do we want to start off now is going to be the mainstay of our batting for years to come?
I've read a lot and listened to a couple of podcasts, Michael, about England's batting woes on this tour. And a lot of people are pointing the finger squarely at county cricket. They're pointing the finger at the ECB and their desire to prioritise white ball cricket at the expense of red ball cricket. Do you have any truck with that and the problems that England are facing currently in Australia?
Yes and no. I mean, England have struggled in Australia for many, many years. I think we mentioned last time we did the vodcast that they've only won half a dozen times since the Second World War. So this is not a new story of finding life difficult in Australia. But of late, they seem to have found life much more difficult in Australia. This is Root's 10th defeat in 11 Test matches, I think, isn't it? The only time he's avoided defeat as captain was on that featherbed at Melbourne in 2017. So the 3 tours that he's been on, 2013-14, 2017-18, whitewash, 4-0, and now 2 from 2. So of late, things seem to be getting tougher. I think a lot of the planning that we hear about over, we're constantly told they've had a plan for 2 years for this series. I think a lot of that is to make up for the fact, a lot of the overthinking is to make up for the fact there are not obvious people to pick coming out of a county game that has been pushed to the margins generally. Not every county championship game is played early and late season, but generally on iffy pitches. And therefore, what ideally you want is a system whereby you've got a steady supply of top-class cricketers and that the cream will rise to the top through natural selection and natural competition. I don't think that's there at the moment because of the issues that we talk about, when it's played, type of pitches it's played, and therefore they're having to try and manufacture a squad.
I'll keep the light off that.
It looks much better, actually.
I think we've had a power cut or something. I don't know what's happening.
I just didn't want you on screen any longer. Okay, well, I'll move on. What do you, Keezy, you watch quite a lot of county cricket, certainly down at Canterbury. Are pitches playing their part in perhaps not having the depth of batting talent? Oh, excellent. Turn the light off again. Are the pitches also to blame?
I sound like a broken record in this because that's absolutely where I see it. And less so the time that it's played, albeit that's a big factor because I still think the pitches are bad in mid-season as well. If you look at the runs scored last year, there were more runs scored in April at the start of the year than there was at other periods. So it is about the pitches, and you've got to understand the real problem with the pitches. It's not about counties just wanting result wickets and stuff like that. There's a bigger problem than that. And that is what isn't producing our cricketers, batsmen, spinners in particular. It's not about turning pitches and stuff like that. My career spanned the good part and the bad part of county pitches. So I started when the pitches improved, actually, and when you ended up 2005 and some of those cricketers that came out of that system. And then from about 2010 onwards, when the pitches actually, I'm standing there batting and you're just getting nicked off for fun, mainly because I was inept, but also because it just got a lot tougher. the cricket wasn't as hard, the bowling wasn't as good, because in the early 2000s, there was loads of cold packs, there was loads of overseas players, 2 overseas players, in fact, at every county, on good pitches. So you learned your trade of the different paces you had to bat at. You learn everything, in a day's batting, you had so many different things you had to deal with. That just doesn't happen anymore. And you really, what I would suggest to people at the ECB and whoever, to really try and work out why these pitches are not great. And it's not just about when it's played.
Good pitches produce good bowlers. I mean, I know the focus there is on batting, but they produce good bowlers in the end. And just the risk of sounding like a broken record, that session that Australia bowled on the third afternoon was the classic performance of a group of bowlers that are not fazed by a flat pitch and a hot day and no or little lateral movement, not fazed by it at all. Whereas England generally are, because they don't have that opportunity to do that in the county game so much. And the point you made right at the start, Nass, about the lengths England bowl, I was chatting to Ricky Ponting about this in the media centre the other day, and he made the point, it's a pretty good one, I think, that because that ball moves for 80 overs in England, you can almost bowl quite conservatively at the start, rein in your figures, in the knowledge that you're going to be in the game all day long for the whole 80 overs. And he said, in Australia, you have to flip that around, because you're only going to get movement for 15 or 20 overs, swing or whatever. So you really have to attack and risk going for runs at the start, and then move to that kind of slightly more attritional grinding phase. And that's very different to England because of the pitches. Pitches are really important, I think. I mean, New Zealand, that's what they went through, wasn't it, to try and become a much better side, really hammered on the pitches, to improve the pitches, to improve the standard of play.
And the pitches also may address the questioning of why they get to Adelaide and leave a spinner out, why they feel that 5 seamers is required in Adelaide. Now, the stats will tell them that finger spin doesn't go well unless you're Nathan Lyon. Opposition finger spin, especially England ones, maybe since Swan, haven't gone well, whether it be Leach or Moeen Ali or whoever. They haven't taken wickets. So maybe that was when Root was saying, if we carry on doing what we've always done, we'll go down the same road. So maybe this was, in fact, I know this was the cunning plan. We're going to leave our spinner out. We're going to play 5 seamers. I would love to know how English cricket has got to a stage where you see that pitch in Adelaide, where Lyon is getting turn and bounce, and the likes of Stokes is going past his outside edge, ball after ball. How we've got to a stage where we don't feel we have a spinner, not Leach. This is not a comment on Leach. This is a comment on spin. How we feel we've got to a stage where we're not good enough to have a spinner in those conditions, really. And it goes to pitches. If your seamers are doing all the work in county cricket, it's not just a turning pitch. So if you just produce a real turning pitch at Taunton, for example, then Best gets away with his lengths. Best gets away with the drag down and the full toss, because he knows sooner or later one will turn and bounce. I know he's moved on to Headingley now. And Leach can get away without drop that Lyon's got. He doesn't have to deceive the batsman before it bounces, because that Taunton pitch will look after that. When we did Graham Swan on the excellent cricket show last year, he said the best thing for him was moving from Wantage Road, Northants, where it spun, to Trent Bridge, where it didn't spin, and he had to learn to deceive the batter. He had to learn to get drift and drop. So the pitches also bring spinners into it and playing of spin into it. So I do think that is something we need to look at in our domestic cricket.
I mean, and that is the point, isn't it? It's a little bit the same with the batting. We sit here and we can sort of nail them for not picking a spinner. How many spinners would we actually rate in English cricket? Because at the moment, I know people will say Parkinson. Well, Parkinson should be there. I'll tell you now, Parkinson's no banker in this. At Test cricket, stuff like that. He's got a lot of work to do. Mason Crane, people like that. The only one, I could think of one, and I think he played 4 games last year. And that was Moriarty, who's a youngster from Surrey. He is the only spinner. I watch a lot of county cricket. I could tell you, said, you know what? He looks like he might have something about him, but that's a mile off.
What's the point though, Rob? I mean, I go back to your safe selections, and so they go a little bit with the Lions. They go Parkinson and Crane. They play one game for the Lions, and neither of them play. So what have they gained? Absolutely. I think any selection, like I say, is an investment, right? We're giving you a train, we're giving you a flight to Australia, we're giving you hotels, we're giving you sort of England Lions shirts and caps. We'd like to see something back. What if you don't play them, they're not going to improve. It's just like they should be selected, but we don't really believe in them.
No, I agree completely. You know, but what I'm saying is that how are you going to do that? Who do you pick out of all of that? I agree completely. That's what they have to do. And when they do play, they have to bowl. But that doesn't mean that's what should be done before you're throwing them into a test match. You can't be just saying that, okay, Parkinson, you can learn your trade in test cricket. And it all goes back to your point about pitches, all that type of stuff. But the fact is, how many spinners do you actually rate? When you sit and you watch, you tell me how many spinners in this country you think, do you know what, he looks like a very good spinner? Because the list, I can't think of many. I mean, Leach and Bess, you know, really?
Don't you think, in a way, though, the thinking behind the team selection here in Adelaide was really worrying and confusing? Whether one accepts that the spinners England have are good enough, or whether they have faith of them, is a rather different matter. When you looked at the selection of that team for this surface, 4 kind of new ball bowlers, 5 right arm seamers, all in a narrow range of pace, leaving out your man of extreme pace, resting him. They said he was fully fit, resting for what? We're 2-0 down, and the spinner. It just didn't make sense. I couldn't see any situation where that selection made sense for this game. And I find that quite concerning, because they must talk about the selection, obviously, ahead of the game. And I can't understand. There's no cricketing common sense that comes up with that team on that pitch.
Don't you think, though, then that again is another issue that they've got, I think. You know, Joe Root gets a lot of stick. You know, I think tactically he's not the greatest captain in the world, but that's nothing new. But actually, the captaincy has brought so much out of his batting. You know, it's made him a better player, almost, that responsibility. And you take that a little bit. And actually, as a setup, what you've got to do then is sort of understand that, because that's nothing new that about Joe Root, and he doesn't always make the greatest decisions. So then what you do, you bring someone in who is brilliant at making those decisions, who's got such a good read of the game, that they can help him out, so that when he turns up to Brisbane and he's thinking, oh, do you know what, I think we might have a bat here, and, you know, on a green pitch, that person, whoever the coach that is, turns around and goes, hang up, mate, don't worry about that. You have a bowl on there, and this is the team you want to go with. And then the same thing at Adelaide. So when he turns up there thinking, oh, I'm going in with 5 seamers, you go, no, hang up. This is the flattest pitch. This is where you need your spinner. So you're actually helping him. Then when he bowls bouncers, gets Ben Stokes bowling bouncers for a session or whatever it was, or they're bowling too short, he comes in at lunch, or a message goes out and they say, just pitch it up a little bit. Or or he says in the morning of the second day, he comes in, he says, who are you starting with, Joe? And he says, oh, you know, I'm going to start with so-and-so and so. And so, no, Robinson's the man you start with. He's been your best bowler. That's the best way to do it. Is that a point, do you think, where they are just not getting it at the moment?
Well, that was the problem, I think we all said, when they changed the procedure and made Silverwood the chief selector. And the accountability, it means before that, he could just defer to the main selector if there were issues. So it just keeps him away from the spotlight for a little bit, and keeps him away from the pressure cooker of errors and making errors. But also secondary, when you are in that bubble, when you are wrapped up with your bowlers around you and you're trying to back them all up, and you're trying to listen to Broad and Anderson and Wokes, and you're trying to show faith in them, sometimes you need someone from the outside to just come in, like you just said, and go, whoa, do you know what this, not what it looks like, because you never should do something on what it looks like, but do you know what this looks like in a cricketing sense? As Michael Atherton just said, just take yourself out and look from above down, and you're going on Adelaide on a flat pitch, dry, hot, and you're going in with 5 samey bowlers. And each decision you make will have repercussions. Because you've gone with 5 samey bowlers, who is going to be your enforcer? for whatever Ath says, you do occasionally need someone to say, we're going to take the pitch out of the equation. And who do they go with their enforcer? The lad that could snap at any stage in Ben Stokes, who's coming back from an injury, who's played the least cricket out of any of them, and who struggled with a knee injury in the last game. He bowls into the ground. And I'm telling you, when Ben Stokes was batting, his bowling efforts was affecting his batting. He could hardly move at times, Ben Stokes. So I do think the decision to make Silverwood the chief selector does have repercussions, that you don't have that outside voice.
Does confused selection, sometimes come due to pressure, not being able to think clearly? You're in an Ashes series, it's not started well, and it's going down the pan very quickly. Does it come down to feeling that pressure, not thinking clearly?
Yes, I think it can come down to many factors. Pressure may be one. History may be another. We talked about the decision at the toss at the Gabba, for example, and the weight of history of Nas and all that kind of stuff may be another. Maybe a lack of knowledge of Australian conditions can be another, although, Root's on his third tour, Anderson fifth, Broad fourth. I don't know how much of a say the two big bowlers are having. And obviously Collingwood and Thorpe have had plenty of experience here. But I was wondering I was wondering myself before I was listening to Rob there talk about a voice to discuss Australian conditions. I wondered whether it might be worth, you bring somebody in on a consultancy basis just for the tour. I was thinking about somebody like Mark Taylor, for example, just a guy who knows Australian conditions inside out, and he's not going to get a tracksuit on, but he might just, from time to time.
He wouldn't help the Poms.
No, exactly, probably not. But I'm just thinking that kind of person who might just say, you know what, this is what you need at Adelaide, or this is how you need to bowl in these conditions. That kind of knowledge, you'd think that knowledge would be there, but given what has happened so far, that's been the really disappointing thing for me. I can take England being beaten by a better side. My God, I played in so many defeats against Australia, who were a better side than we were. And no doubt we made lots of errors as well. But I do think England's selection, decision-making and strategizing on the 9 days of this tour so far has been beyond bad.
You're right. And it's not just been 9 days. It's been going on for a bit longer than that through India. And I know we had COVID and all of that stuff. And I agree completely on someone like Mark Taylor, but aren't these decisions that the head coach should know? Aren't these decisions that, as a player, even if you're as good as Joe Root, you don't know everything. But that's why you have a coach, not to tell you how to hit a cover drive and stuff like that and tell you when the bus is leaving. It's there to actually tell you and to help you make the right decisions as a captain. And all those things you've spoken about, getting in a consultant, aren't these things? There's enough coaches there. Shouldn't they be the ones that know this or not?
Well, just to play devil's advocate, and it goes back to something I asked Ath last week about cricketing decisions. They rely heavily on stats. Now, whether that's right or wrong, if someone was from that backroom staff here now to back themselves up, they would say, you do know that finger spin, we struggle with finger spin in Australia. You do know that Moeen Ali doesn't get wickets out there. Leach is getting belted. So why are we leaving out Broad or Anderson or Wokes or any of our seamers for a spinner? They would hide it or explain it by the fact that finger spin, apart from Lyon, doesn't do very well out there with a Kookaburra ball. So my point being is that there are reasons for them doing it. And this is my question, whether you go with history or whether you go with, you are our finger spinner, whether it be Bess or Leach or whoever, this pitch says play one, so we're going to play one. Almost don't just throw the towel in and say we give up on finger spin in Australia. This pitch says play one, we're going to play one.
I'm not for 1 minute saying if England play a spinner, the outlook or outcome would have been any different to this game. It's just the thought process behind the selection I find a little worrying, because there are very few decisions that England have made so far on this tour that have been good ones. And that is a concern, I think.
I also don't, you're right, there are reasons, as we've said, that they clearly don't rate their spinner. That's why it's not a shoe-in to play, where any other spinner that you guys play with, would have got in there from Giles to Swan, whoever, it wouldn't be an issue. Even Mo and Ali, they probably would think, you know what, we'd play Mo and Ali on here. So I get that with the spinner. Where it's just the logic doesn't work is when they leave out Mark Wood.
Yeah.
You know, when you get there and you see the flat pitch, and it doesn't work when you look at the green pitch and you say we're going to rest Broad and Anderson for the day-night test match. You know, and that's where the logic with the spinner is a bit of a red herring, because I get that.
The two are one and the same thing, aren't they? You've just got Steve Smith out in the Gabba. This is a guy who's averaged 100 against us in the last 2 series. Wood gets him hopping around. You're going to a pitch that looks dry and biscuit coloured, and you're leaving him out and you're saying he's rested. Now, if he can't play back-to-back test matches, that's a different matter. They said he's rested for the next game. Now, England 2-0 down. It's only one team in the history of the Ashes that's come back from 2-0 to win the Ashes. What are you resting him for?
Before we move on to Melbourne, as the players will shortly be doing in a couple of days' time, you would think, Michael, I want to ask you, about Steve Smith. Now, a great return to the captaincy for him, because Australia have walloped England in that second test. He made 93 in the first innings. But his return to the Australian Test captaincy, how was that viewed in Australia by the public and indeed in the press box?
Generally okay. I mean, there was a slightly mixed reaction when he came out to bat at Adelaide. There was a mixture of cheers and boos. Whether the boos were just from the Barmy Army or the remnants of the Barmy Army, I don't know. But I would say it was a mixed reaction. But it generally, in print, on television, in radio, the majority opinion has been he's done his time. And therefore, you know, if he's given an opportunity, there's no reason why he shouldn't have that opportunity. That I would say has been the general opinion, and obviously he had a good return to the captaincy. But they've announced the same squad for the next game, so Cummins is obviously going to come back in. I don't know whether Hazelwood will be fit in time, and one assumes Richardson would keep his place in that regard. And it may work out in their favour, because Cummins is going to be a bit fresh now for the next game.
Well, we'll come on to what England might or might not do, Australia might not do with selection. But Nasser, tell us, what's it like to play in the Boxing Day Test at the Melbourne Cricket Ground?
Well, usually for us, it's like they'd go in there now, 2-0 down, and what was it, 11 days? Is my record still intact? 11 days losing the Ashes. Foster not appealing. I mean, Steve Ward nicking it and Foster not appealing, and Key and Flintoff laughing at slip or whatever is not a great memory. Hoggard on the hook, first ball Halmerson to Hayden. He's sort of 50 yards in and the ball drifts over his head for 4. No, not very good, the Boxing Day Test. It's a great atmosphere. When we played there, they were still rebuilding it at times. Now it is an absolute bowl, an absolute cauldron. It is a great venue. Just walking up, you can walk through town and get up there if you want, or go on the little minibus. We've all been there. You go in the dungeon down below. It is an incredible amphitheatre. You know, it can be a flat pitch. That drop-in pitch last time was just dead, wasn't it? They say this time there is a little bit more pace in it. You know, that's they're the rumours. I hope so, because that was a dead pitch, a dull pitch last time there, which you can get with drop-ins. But it is a great atmosphere. It's good before as well, you know, Christmas Day, you get together with all your families, all the team environment. In Aths Day, I think we'd banned it by the time Captain Grumpy Me had banned it by then, but you had various dress-up do's and things. So it was great fun. It's a bit difficult because you're trying to spend time with your family, you're trying to do the Christmassy things, even in a bubble, all the presents and secret Santas, but in the back of your mind, you know the next day is a test match against Australia. So you constantly want to enjoy Christmas, but also realising the real reason you're out there is to try and do well for England. But it's a great week.
I listened to Goffey talk about one of your trips that you had out there, and because you had that fancy dress party on boxing before the Boxing Day Test, he reckoned that you lot spent more time and effort getting your costumes than you did on any other cricket.
I think Wayne Morton, we all did Secret Santa, and Wayne Morton got a can of Tetley out for Dominic Cork, and no one could work out the gag. And he went, "Here you go, Corky." And Corky looked at him and said, "Why that?" And he went, "Because you're bitter, mate." So Secret Santa was good fun. MCG, unless you lose in the Ashes in 11 days, is usually good fun.
You got what, Af?
Some deodorant.
That ran out many years ago. We'll have to get it again for this Christmas. On a serious side, I mean, Joe Root going into this Test match as captain, 2-0 down, 3 to go. Things aren't going well for the team, not well for him, quite painful at times at Adelaide. How significant, not just for this Ashes series, how significant is this Test match for his captaincy?
Oh, hugely. Often these Ashes series begin and end a cycle, don't they? And Joe Root's been in the job a fair while now. If the series goes very badly, there may well be consequences to that for either the captain, the coach, or who knows, however many decision makers in that England setup. But that's a way down the line yet. Not many teams will come back from 2-0 down, and I don't expect England to. But I think they showed today in this final day that they've got some fight and some spirit, that they're perfectly capable of making Australia work hard for their gains. And that's the kind of attitude that they've got to take into the next game. So they'll draw a bit from this. They're playing against a pretty good Australian attack. I think Australia's batting has got some frailties, and England's catching, the chances that they've missed. I still think if they get runs, they could yet cause Australia 1 or 2 problems. But I think getting runs is going to be challenging because it's a relentless attack.
Well, Nas, the runs are obviously the currency that England will need to invest in heavily as they go to the MCG. Do you see them making any changes in the batting? Normally, when we get beaten, we change the bowling. That's probably going to happen again.
Well, they could do. It just depends how those lads that haven't been playing. I mean, I couldn't believe it that Crawley and Lawrence didn't go and play that Lions game. I don't know whether there are COVID protocols or concussion subs and things like that, so you have to keep them at the ground. I don't know. We're not out there, but you'd have liked Crawley and Lawrence to have a good hit in the last couple of weeks, that if you do want to make changes for Burns or Pope, you could bring those in. You have to go, and I'm afraid we giggle at times where coaches say they're hitting them well in the nets and all. You do have to go with a little bit of, now you're paid, you've got all those coaches there. Have a look at them, see where they are with their game. If Pope is still looking frenetic in the nets and he's nicking off all the time, you'd have to make that call and change it. If Burns is still shuffling across, they said that Burns was playing pretty well before this series. So you just never know. The difficult one for me actually is the number 8 position. I think Wood obviously is going to come back in, probably, maybe one out abroad, and Anderson will miss out. Do you leave Wokes out for a spinner? Because Wokes has got some useful runs down there, as he did today. But do you just go on the bowling, forget his runs? And then who bats at 8? Ollie Robinson at 8? Or then do you have to go Don Bess because they got left-handers and you bring Bess in? But Bess, as we've seen, doesn't give you control at all. So that number 8 position for me is what I would be thinking most about.
Keezy, what would you do?
I would say thank you to Rory Burns, and I would go in with Zach, which won't be a surprise to any of you. I just think it's time now to sort of look forward, and I'd also probably just take out Ollie Pope. I think Dan Lawrence has actually played pretty well at times. He's just not as aesthetically pleasing as Ollie Pope, but I think he's equally as impressive if he looks good and if he gets going, if that makes any sense.
Not really. So we'll go to Michael. Michael, what do you think?
Oh, blimey. It's really, really tough and tricky. I don't see any easy solutions at all. Usually when it's not obvious what change should be made to improve it, I'm generally one who sticks rather than twists. So I'd probably give Burns and Pope another go myself. And hope that they can take something from what happened this afternoon. But I don't say that with any conviction or confidence at all.
Okay, finally, just on the general situation in Australia and the potential complexities of getting the Ashes completely finished. Final test is now in Hobart as opposed to Perth. COVID cases obviously rising rapidly in the UK. as they appear to be in Australia. What is the latest? Do you think there could be any bumps along the way in terms of getting everybody safely around the country?
I think they're likely to be. Cases are on the rise in New South Wales and Melbourne, in Victoria. And the players seem unwilling to have too many hard restrictions put on them, which I completely understand after a couple of years of those kind of restrictions. I think they've been told that, they can't go for things like a haircut and do selfies and go in big groups for dinner. And if they're dining, they must be outside, all those kind of things. So there's one or two more minor restrictions being put on them. But I think that the positive test in the media centre the other day in Adelaide just brought home to everybody how fragile this Ashes series is and how quickly it could be derailed. We were all slightly worried when that positive test came through, because were there more and people are close contacts in South Australia, you end up isolating for quite a long period. It's less draconian in New South Wales and Victoria, but still, it's tricky, and we could yet see players being pulled out, as Pat Cummins was the other day.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts. Hope you all have a very good Christmas, particularly you at home. Have a great Christmas and a safe Christmas in these difficult times. Thanks for watching or listening.